So in my previous video where I talked about Shaneil quitting dancehall, I noted that she had a falling out with her manager Richie Flores. In her words, she called Richie the devil. When I first heard that, I was like, those are some strong words to label someone. He must have done her the worst way, particularly given how emotional she was in the video. However, as you well know, there's always three sides to a story. In this case, it's Shaneil's side, her manager's side, and the truth.
You want the truth? You want the truth? You can't handle the truth!
So what caused the split? From what both parties put out there, it's three things really. So Shaneil had been booked for quite a number of shows, and at some point she stated she had needed a break. The reason she wanted a break was in order to sort out her finances. However, she felt that she was being ignored as shows were continued to be booked. She said she had to make multiple requests to Richie before being able to get a break in September. The break in September was confirmed by Richie in his interview with Mr. Vegas, as her next shows started in October. He did not speak to Shaneil, having to ask him multiple times. This was the first fracture in the relationship based on what we know publicly. I think why this created an issue was that Shaneil feels that despite being the artist, she hasn't had the control to make executive decisions relating to her affairs, given that she had to ask Richie multiple times to ease up on the bookings. Richie, as her manager, should be taking direction from her when she says so. I think this theme of control, or lack of it, follows through with respect to the other issues she's had with her manager. The second fracture is the arrangement on how monies were to be paid. The financial arrangement the parties had, which neither disputed, is as follows. For all bookings, Richie and a third-party booking agent was to get 30%, while Shaneil received 70%. Of that 30%, 20 would go to Richie for management fees, and 10 for the booking agent fees. However, as bookings usually go, only 50% is paid in advance before any show is complete. So basically, Shaneil would get 20% of the advance, while Richie and the booking agent received their full 20 and 10%. After performing, Shaneil would get the remaining 50%. I think during the period of her wanting to sort out her finances, Shaneil established her business. In the live, she called it a disregarded entity. Since her business is established in the US of A disregarded entity, in layman's terms, is a corporation that acts like a sole proprietorship for income tax purposes. Meaning, when Shaneil files her taxes, the earnings that her LLC receives will be filed on her personal tax returns. Shaneil would then be taxed on her net earnings. I hope you're still with me because this is the crux of it all. Instead of Shaneil receiving the net earnings, that is, the 20% before the show and the 50% after the show, what Shaneil wanted was for Richie to forward all the monies to her first, and then she would use those funds to pay Richie and the booking agent. Now, why would she do that? I think there are two reasons for that. The first is that she wanted to establish a paper trail for tax purposes. That way, if the IRS came to her and said, let's see your books, they could see exactly how much she was making, what her expenses are, and properly assess the taxes owed. As it stands right now, the IRS wouldn't get a true picture of her finances. And I can understand Shaneil wanting to sort out her finances cause the IRS don't play. Them not afraid to fling people in prison for tax evasion. But I'm no expert in US tax accounting, and maybe I sound foolish here, but I would figure if Richie provided invoices to show payments made to himself and the booking agent, along with evidence showing the gross booking revenues received, that would be enough proof for Shaneil to establish her paper trail. She wouldn't therefore need to show Richie on her payroll. The second purpose I believe why she wanted all funds forwarded to her is to establish control as the boss of the operation. This is what Shaneil said on her live.
Upon conversation between me and Richie, I said to Richie, he said that he doesn't work for me, right? And I said to him, can you clarify? You're not my employee? He says, no. In addition, they said, you hired Mr. Richie Flores and this company, Rebel Ace Music Limited from 2021-20. So that means if I hire somebody, then they work for me, right? Unless I not understand.
Her statement would suggest that it's Richie who is her employee and not the other way around. But here's where I think Shaneil is wrong. Richie isn't actually an employee, but rather an independent contractor. There's a big difference. Richie, through his company Rebel Ace Music, is providing management services to Shaneil. It's not a situation of him working for her, but rather him working with her. I think this is an area of misunderstanding that maybe both parties could have hammered out if they had a written contract between them. Yet, despite all this, I can understand why Shaneil would feel away with the funds not coming directly to her first. Pre this, Shaneil mentioned that oftentimes money had to come out of her own pocket prior to getting paid so that she can pay for things like her hair and her outfit for the show. This is before receiving any of the 20% of advance money. Remember, Richie and the booking agent get their full fee of the first 50% of the booking revenue. Shaneil only gets 20% before the show and 50% after the show. Richie stated that this was basically industry practice for his fees as well as the booking agent fees to be pulled up front. I think in the interview that he had with Mr. Vegas, he said the reason for that was sometimes incidentals may occur and they may have to use those funds to pay for those incidentals. He also mentioned that Shaneil's road manager got paid out of his cut. But back to the whole idea of this being an industry practice, I noticed that it wasn't something Mr. Vegas disputed, which would lead me to think that that's true, given he's a seasoned artist in the business. I think it's sad though that the industry standard has the artist getting only 20% of the advance funds while the manager gets paid up front, given that the artist is the one causing income to be generated in the first place.
Well, ain't this a bitch?
It's even sadder for female artists who generally have higher upfront costs than male counterparts, since image is a key component for female artists in dancehall. So I can understand some of the frustration Shaneil states with having to use funds outside of the bookings to cover expenses and wanting to have more control. The final fracture causing the split is Shaneil requesting that Richie send the full balance of her deposits to her. She complained that Richie's excuse for not sending it is that his account would be struck for money laundering. This would imply that Richie is holding on to her payments because he's a bad person. However, working in the banking industry for a little bit, I know that money laundering is a huge thing that banks look out for. And accounts are usually flagged if the bank thinks that the transaction is unusual, maybe done for the very first time, and the amount transferred is over $10,000. So Richie stating that as an excuse isn't far-fetched. That being said, there are workarounds. However, again, I believe Richie wasn't keen on sending the funds as he was following industry standards where managers will take their cut in full before handing the remainder to the artist. To note, Richie claims he has paid Shaneil all the balances owed to her. However, Shaneil had mentioned a number of times where basically she felt that she had to run down Richie for her money. I'm sure she felt slighted by that because again it would show a lack of control in her own affairs. And personally for me not supposed to run down people for what's owed to me. So what do I think is operating overall? Well, first of all, I want to say that we likely don't know the whole picture and all the things that transpired leading to the falling out. But what we do know didn't necessarily warrant the public display of cutting ties. I think Shaneil was frustrated with the current arrangement given she didn't have the control over her affairs despite being the one to generate the income. I also think this was a misunderstanding or miscommunication that could have been talked through, where both parties could understand where each other is coming from and possibly establish a written agreement showing the duties and responsibilities of each party, rather than an oral agreement. I understand that this was a trial period, but even so, it's better to have things established in a written document to reduce the chances of things being misconstrued. Anyhow, it may be a bit too late for that with Shaneil leaving dancehall.